I've had both success and failure in business. And I think it's really important that you learn from your mistakes. And actually, I think anyone in business, particularly business owners, will recognize they don't get everything right first time. And the first thing I did on leaving university was to start a .com company, which I believed at the time was going to make me millions, and turned out not to succeed. But it was a fantastic learning experience. And actually, I learned as part of that to sell, to go out and try and convince people of a product. It wasn't the sales of my business that were wrong. It was the commercialization. It was actually making it into something which was financially viable. Other people did that much more successfully in that space, and so I learned from that.
Small Biz Digital Media presents Connect, Convince, Convert, Inspiring Business Success Stories with Dave Bird, Steve Ennis and Martin Hill.
Today, I'm absolutely delighted to say we have Robin Walker, MP for Worcester, joining us to share some of his experiences over the last 13 years in which he served the community here in Worcester. Good morning to you, Robin.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
It's been great that you can take time out of your busy surgery day today to come and see us. What we don't know so much about is the motivations that have driven you over the last 13 years to serve the people in your constituency. Could you tell us what is at the heart of your motivation in doing so?
I think the key thing is making a difference and being able to help people. And I think that's actually what motivates most people in politics from all political perspectives, is wanting to improve people's lives, wanting to help people. One of the things I've always believed passionately is that people need the opportunity to succeed. People need to have the opportunities put in front of them, and education is a key way of unlocking that opportunity. So when I first began running for election in Worcester, I used to go around and talk to all the local schools, try and understand what the challenges were that they were facing, what they needed to change to be able to do even better. And when I made my maiden speech in Parliament, I designed it to be made on the education day of the Queen's speech. Unfortunately, the way Parliament works is that you jump up and down and try and get called to speak. And I was up and down on my feet for about 8 hours trying to get called to speak and didn't get called on that day. So I then got invited to do my speech in the economy day of the Queen's speech, which was the following day. And so I opened my speech by saying, vital to the future of our economy is education, and launched into the speech I made I designed to make in the first place. But it is about making a difference for people, and whether it's for the stuff we do in surgeries as members of Parliament, where you're able to help with all sorts of perhaps small things, not necessarily big P political things, or whether it's changing the law or campaigning for change in Parliament, I think that's what motivates most people in politics.
You've had a fantastic run, 13 years as the sitting MP, which is, really impressive in this day and age. Over that time, if you are in a place now where you reflect on what you've done, could you share with us the one thing you're most proud of, the one thing with hindsight and the perspective of reflection, what we might have wished to have done differently, and one thing you might say to your successor, Mark Bayliss, should he be successful, that he might champion and take forward and deliver on?
It's really difficult to land on one particular thing, because there are actually lots of different things of different scales and different size. I think if it was sort of the biggest bang political thing, when we were in negotiations over the spending review, when I was in the Department for Education, getting the biggest single settlement for schools that they've ever had, I would say that's probably something which will make a long-term difference, and that's something I'm certainly very proud of. But actually, it's not always the big things that really matter. I remember my first ever surgery. A gentleman came to see me who had a really difficult, complicated problem relating to local NHS trusts in Worcestershire and Birmingham not talking to each other. By using the power of having those two letters after my name, I was able to unlock that problem. And that individual came up to me 3 weeks later and said, "I think you've saved my life." That kind of thing gives just as much satisfaction as something in the big P political space. And it's therefore really difficult to land on one thing. But I think in terms of what would I have done differently, again, you have different sort of moments in the course of a career where you think different things and act differently. I guess when I was first in Parliament, I ran for the Education Select Committee, and I didn't get it. And quite rightly, I got beaten by lots of people with probably more experience than myself, people who had been principals of colleges or teachers in schools. And at the time, I sort of dusted myself off and thought, right, I'm going to go and do something completely different. And I actually ended up on the business select committee. And I did that and enjoyed that for many years. But I have to say, now that at the end of my parliamentary career, I'm chairing the Education Select Committee, I do think it's such a fascinating area of policy. I wish I'd perhaps stuck to that a bit longer. And I wish I'd actually been able to do more in that space earlier on.
And for the future, for Mark Bayliss, what advice might you give him?
Well, I think the key advice I give to anyone taking on that challenge is you've got to listen to people. And just as in the business world, you've got to listen to your customers. As a member of parliament, you've got to listen to your constituents. And I think in a place like Worcester, which, let's face it, doesn't belong to any one of the political parties, it's always going to be hotly contested. It's always going to be one of the places that decides the outcome of national elections. Actually listening to people and listening to what they want is absolutely vital. And so for me, that's been addressing issues of our local NHS, campaigning to get the hospital upgraded, trying to deliver fairer funding for schools, trying to deal with some of the traffic challenges that Worcester has. And for me, that was delivering the Southern Link Road was a really important element. The dualling of the Southern Link and the Carrington Bridge was a really important long-term campaign. For my successor, of course, they'll need to find new things to focus on and to campaign on. But I think delivering the basics and listening to what people really want is absolutely vital.
And it's also the case, as well as your successful parliamentary career, you've enjoyed real success in the private business world as well. To our audience, who are all business owners from the local community, how can the lessons you've learned guide them in terms of making success of their businesses on that journey to connect, convince and convert?
Well, I think the first thing I'd say is that I've had both success and failure in business. And I think it's really important that you learn from your mistakes. And actually, I think anyone in business, particularly business owners, will recognise they don't get everything right first time. And the first thing I did on leaving university was to start a .com company, which I believed at the time was going to make me millions and turned out not to succeed. But it was a fantastic learning experience. And actually, I learned as part of that to sell, to go out and try and convince people of a product. It wasn't the sales of my business that were wrong. It was the commercialization. It was actually making it into something which was financially viable. Other people did that much more successfully in that space, and so I learned from that. And I decided that I needed to get a proper job. And so I went and did interviews and was interviewed for a job. Finally got a place in headhunting, in doing search and recruiting in that space. I found that very interesting for a short period of time, and then, to be honest, found it wasn't for me. It wasn't the right career for me, and I found myself, to some extent, in my early 20s, sort of stuck in a bit of a rut, business-wise, doing that. Knew I needed to find something different to do, didn't know what it was, and was then very lucky to have a colleague who said to me, I think you'd be very good at this financial communications, financial PR world. You should go and talk to my brother who runs a business in that space. And I literally sort of went along and asked what the business did before I sort of conducted the proper interview, found myself a niche and loved that, and was then very successful in that particular business, advising companies. I think, what did I learn from that? I learned that for businesses, getting the detail right is crucially important. The chief executives and the chairman who I work for, who were sticklers for detail, were often the most successful ones and the ones whose companies went on to do great things. Having a very clear understanding of your strategy and how to sell it is vital if you're going to convince investors. And actually, some of the most successful and impressive businesses I work for were not necessarily the glamorous ones. I worked for big names in television like Carlton TV and B-Sky B, as it was called in those days, now Sky. But actually, some of the most successful businesses, some of the ones that made amazing amounts of money and then got bought at the top of the market, were engineering businesses where they didn't. I remember Kidder PLC, brilliant fire products business. It had its specialist niche. It did it extraordinarily well, and they got the detail right, and they had a very clear strategy. They were bought by a big American conglomerate. We had a sort of hostile takeover situation where I was defending them. Everyone could see the value in that business, and they did it really well. Another example, Pilkington Glass, great British name. And that was a business that had a really clear strategy of what it wanted to do to sort out its finances and grow. The communication of that strategy was everything, and that convinced investors that it was a company that was worth a great deal of money. So I'd say it's about the passion you have for a business. It's about being able to communicate that clearly, but it's also about getting all the detail right. And I think when I left university, I had starry-eyed ideas of kind of being a dot-com millionaire. I didn't necessarily have the experience and the knowledge to get the detail right.
Yeah, and getting the detail right is where the money matters. So it's been interesting as well. You've announced that you're stepping down as an MP whenever the next election is called. And it's also the case that for the last 13 years, you've split your life between serving the community of Worcester and living in London. You're a father of 2 children, one aged 5 and 2. How have you managed to juggle that? Because a lot of our audience really struggle with the demands of the work-life balance that are set upon being a business owner.
It is really difficult, and politics as owning your own business is all consuming. It can take a huge amount of time, day and night, and of course the hours that Parliament sits, they call them family friendly hours nowadays, and that's sitting till 10 o'clock at night on a Monday, 7 o'clock on a Tuesday, Wednesday, and 6 o'clock on a Thursday. Now, I don't consider, most people wouldn't consider 10 o'clock at night terribly family friendly. I think one of the challenges is living in 2 places. And to be frank, I grew up living in 2 places, so I'm lucky in that respect, in that it's a lifestyle I'm used to. But it is a big challenge for a family. And I've always taken the view that I need to be in Worcester every Friday, and doing visits, getting engaged in things when Parliament isn't sitting on a Friday as well as on the weekends. That is a wrench when your family are in another place. And if my family were in Worcester, as we've thought about seriously and looked at that, then I'd be away from them 3 or 4 days a week because of the need to be in Westminster. So that balance is a real wrench. And I think my sort of biggest requirement, certainly from my wife and my children, is to try and find a new role where I'll be in one place rather than constantly toing and froing. Now, when I was a child, I was very lucky that my father had been very successful in business before politics, and my mother was able to stay at home and be with the family all the time. So as a family, we all went up and down the M40. We all lived in 2 places, and we were in Worcestershire every weekend and in London every week. We were able to make that work. In this day and age, it's pretty much impossible to own a house or maintain a property in London unless 2 of you are working. And so, I've always had a wife who works and who has a full-time job. At that stage, it's not possible or easy to move a family backwards and forwards and to live in 2 places. And so I think that is one of the big challenges. And I'd say for anyone, and I know the passion and the lifeblood that people pour into owning their own business, balancing family and business is a really crucial thing to be able to do. And recognizing that actually having a strong family gives you strength that you can then take into the business arena. And so making sure that you don't neglect that is a really important part of I think what we all need to try and do in our lives.
So while your wife must be terribly proud of your achievements as the serving MP, the announcement that you're leaving opens an opportunity for a new door and a new chapter. So what are your plans post the election for Robin Walker, the general member of the public?
Well, I think I need to probably get back into the private sector and earn some money, and I probably need to do something which involves working 5 days a week rather than 6.5. But it's something that I will look around and see what the opportunities are. I think clearly there's possibly a year to go as Member of Parliament for Worcester. There are things I want to do during that time, big campaigns that I'm involved with at the moment, try and get funded places for our medical school in Worcester and try and get further upgrades for our hospital. I want to focus on those in the meantime. I've got a really interesting set of opportunities with the Education Select Committee, pursuing things there. But of course, yes, I will need to start thinking about what I do next. And I think the crucial aim of that for me is to do something which is focused in the week to allow me to spend more of my weekend time with the children.
Well, Robin, listen, we've really appreciated you taking the time to come and see us today. And we wish you all the very best with whatever it is, whenever the election comes and your private career pursuits after that.
Thank you very much.
This episode of Connect, Convince, Convert was produced by Dave Bird and presented by Steve Ennis. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoyed it, so you don't miss any future shows.